He pulled a gun on my daughter. Right there in broad daylight on our own front lawn, because of a wind chime. And behind him? Karen. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched like a crown, smirking like she just won the HOA Hunger Games. You'd think this was some kind of joke, a bizarre misunderstanding. It wasn't. It was calculated, deliberate, and part of a pattern that started with a hedge being half an inch too tall and ended with a sheriff's deputy waving a loaded weapon at my 24-year-old child over a piece of decorative metal. That's how things work in Sycamore Springs, our picture-perfect retirement neighborhood with white fences, pastel mailboxes, and, unfortunately, a tyrant named Karen Mallory. Karen wasn't elected. She emerged. Like mold in a humid basement, slow at first, then impossible to ignore. One day she was just a woman walking her Bichon Frise in a rhinestone leash. The next, she was calling emergency board meetings, issuing fines for non-neutral flower pots, and rewriting HOA bylaws with the ferocity of a caffeinated dictator. And when she met Dean, the part-time deputy full-time power trip, things went from annoying to dangerous. Together they weren't just enforcing the rules. They were enforcing control. And for a while they got away with it. Until they went after my daughter and learned the hard way that this family doesn't scare easy. Especially not my daughter. Because she may be soft-spoken, but she's military police, trained in de-escalation, surveillance, and yes, self-defense. But before we get to the part where Dean finds himself in handcuffs and Karen drops her clipboard like it's radioactive, let me take you back. Because like any good suburban thriller, this didn't start with violence. It started with a letter about our mailbox flag being the wrong shade of red. Before we dive into this story, trust me, you're gonna want to stick around. Can I ask you a small favor? If you've ever dealt with an HOA nightmare, or just enjoy watching clipboard tyrants get what's coming, give this video a like. It really helps our channel grow and lets us keep sharing these wild true stories. Also, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because new HOA tales drop every single day. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We've been blown away seeing folks from all over the country and even Canada sharing their own Karen horror stories. Now back to Sycamore Springs. When we first moved into Sycamore Springs, it felt like a postcard. Wide sidewalks, roses in bloom, kids selling lemonade, neighbors who waved from behind manicured hedges. My husband and I had just retired. After 35 years of teaching and one exhausting move across states, we were ready to slow down. We wanted to garden, drink iced tea on the porch, and maybe host the occasional game night. That dream lasted exactly 11 days. That's when Karen left her first note. Taped to our door. Mailbox flag non-compliant, color code 2.4. Please repaint within 72 hours to HOA approved crimson dust. Crimson dust. Not red. Not burgundy. Crimson dust. I remember thinking maybe she's just overly enthusiastic. Maybe she cares a lot. That optimism lasted until we received our first fine. $50 for excessive seasonal decor, which to be clear, was a single pumpkin with a plaid ribbon. It escalated fast. Every week, a new citation, hose visible from street view. Unauthorized porch chair. Bird bath of non-natural stone. It was like living under botanical martial law. We weren't the only targets, of course. The Turners down the block got fined for their daughter's sidewalk chalk. The Wilsons had to repaint their shutters 3 times because the shade of navy wasn't HOA approved. We all joked about it at first, called her the decorator general, but Karen didn't find that funny. Especially not after she declared herself HOA president for life. That's not a joke, by the way. She actually changed the bylaws so elections were no longer necessary unless she stepped down voluntarily. Which she wouldn't. Because continuity is crucial to neighborhood stability. Her words. Not ours. Enter Dean. Karen's not-so-secret weapon. A sheriff's deputy with a badge, a buzz cut, and apparently a vendetta against wind chimes, porch swings, and free will. Karen claimed he was just providing community support. What he was really doing was patrolling our streets, knocking on doors, and citing people for made-up violations like trash can exposure or pet-induced noise events. And then my daughter April moved in. She was between deployments, needed a few months to rest and be close to family. She's respectful, quiet, the type of person who bakes cookies for the neighbors and waters everyone's plants while they're on vacation. Karen hated her on sight. Said her car was too militarized for the neighborhood aesthetic. Said her boots made too much noise on the walkway. Said her presence was an energy disruption. Whatever that means. April laughed it off. Until Karen and Dean showed up while she was hanging a wind chime on the front porch. They said it violated Sound Regulation Code 8.2b, non-ambient noise devices. April asked if that was real. Dean put his hand on his holster. April froze. I saw it from the window. That moment changed everything. April didn't report it, not yet, but she started writing things down. Dates, incidents, names. And I started paying closer attention. Because something was seriously wrong in Sycamore Springs. And we were going to fix it. Not with yelling. Not with threats. But with strategy. Because if Karen thought she was the only one who knew how to use rules like a weapon, she was about to meet someone who'd been trained to fight with more than just forms and fines. And trust me, it gets worse before it gets better. The thing about April is she never bluffs. She doesn't posture, doesn't provoke. But when she sets her jaw a certain way and starts organizing her thoughts into neat, bullet-pointed lists, you'd better believe something's coming. After the wind chime incident, she didn't sleep. Not because she was scared, April doesn't scare easy, but because she knew what Dean had done was illegal. And worse, she knew that if it happened once, it would happen again. So she went into what I call MP mode, military police mindset. Research, documentation, and precision. The very next morning she woke up at 6, brewed coffee, and started combing through the Sycamore Springs HOA bylaws. All 76 pages of them. By breakfast she'd already highlighted 43 separate instances where Karen had violated her own policies. By lunch she was making copies. By dinner she had a folder. And by that weekend? That folder was 2 inches thick, labeled Operation Paper Trail. Meanwhile, Karen ramped up her nonsense. Maybe she sensed something was shifting. Maybe she just didn't like seeing April on the porch. She started sending daily emails to the HOA mailing list titled Neighborhood Harmony Updates. They read like veiled threats. Let's maintain peace by discouraging disruptive elements. Remember, unauthorized visitors create instability. Compliance equals community. It was like living inside a very boring dystopian novel. But the final straw that set April off wasn't an email. It was a squirrel. Specifically, our dog Scout, a 15-year-old beagle who's more smell than bark, happened to let out a sleepy little woof when a squirrel ran across the lawn. Karen, who was conveniently walking Muffin at that very moment, whipped out her phone and filmed it like it was an episode of Law and Order. HOA unit. The next day we got a violation notice. Animal noise disturbance. Code 11.9. Warning issued. Next infraction, $200 fine and notification to animal control. That's when April snapped. She didn't yell. She didn't threaten. She just got very, very quiet. Then she pulled up a chair at the kitchen table and said, "We're going to need affidavits." And just like that, the operation began. First she went door to door. Politely, calmly, clipboard in hand. And she started asking questions. At first, neighbors were hesitant. No one wanted to poke the bear. But once April explained that she wasn't starting a fight, she was documenting a pattern, something shifted. People started talking. The Crawfords admitted they'd been fined for unapproved curtain color. The Simmons had 3 separate citations for lawn ornament proximity. The Tanners? They were fined $300 for painting their mailbox without written approval, even though they used the exact color on Karen's list. Then came the real goldmine. The Daltons had footage. Actual footage of Dean walking into their backyard without permission to measure their fence. April watched it 3 times. The date stamp? The same day Dean issued a notice about privacy fence inconsistency to half the block. She collected everything. Testimonies. Emails. Pictures. She took screenshots of Karen's posts in the community Facebook group, especially the one where she wrote, "People who don't follow the rules shouldn't be surprised when law enforcement needs to get involved." By the end of the week, April had turned our guest room into a war room. Maps, notes, timestamps. She was cross-referencing incident reports with neighborhood events, tracking inconsistencies in Karen's budgets, even identifying repeated misuses of proxy voting during HOA meetings. And then she found it. Buried in an old PDF from a 2021 board meeting. A line item labeled Security Infrastructure Upgrade, $1,200. April raised an eyebrow. We'd never seen any new security upgrades. No new cameras. No signage. Nothing. Until she walked to the end of the street and spotted something that hadn't been there before. A small, almost unnoticeable camera attached to the HOA-maintained lamppost, pointed directly at our home. She came back inside, silent, and typed for an hour. That night, she filed a formal request with the county records office. 3 days later, a brown envelope arrived. Inside, confirmation that the HOA had never received a permit for surveillance equipment. No vote was held. No approval given. Just Karen, and a camera. April added it to the folder. Illegal surveillance, page 1. Meanwhile, Karen must have sensed something. Because suddenly the newsletter tone changed. Now it was about neighborhood unity. About celebrating compliance. About moving forward from recent disturbances with positivity. But it was too late. The neighbors were talking. Quietly at first, then louder. Someone even organized a Free the Wind Chimes barbecue. Half the block showed up. People brought cookies. One man wore a shirt that said Code 8.2 Be My Foot. It was the first time in months we'd felt like we lived in a community, not a compound. And April? She just smiled and said, "It's not about revenge. It's about balance." She wasn't done. Because what she uncovered next would take everything to a level Karen never saw coming. HOA funds, unreported stipends, and Dean's little badge not meaning what he claimed it did. But we'll get to that. Let's just say, by then the wind chime wasn't the only thing ringing. The alarm bells were just getting started. The third camera showed up on a Tuesday. We'd barely finished our morning coffee when April froze mid-step on the porch. "Is that new?" she asked, pointing to the tall street lamp across from our house. Mounted just below the light, hidden behind a plastic shield, was a small black dome. Another camera. This one even closer. "That makes 3, April muttered, heading straight to her laptop. 10 minutes later she confirmed it. The HOA had purchased and installed at least 3 new surveillance cameras. All positioned to monitor specific homes. Ours had 2 in direct line of sight. Karen had turned Sycamore Springs into her own version of Big Brother. But this time she messed up. Badly. What? Because April wasn't just documenting violations now. She was building a legal case. She spent the next 2 days contacting neighbors, gathering statements, checking if anyone had approved this sudden burst of security upgrades. No one had. There was no vote. No announcement. Just Karen and her emergency powers, which she now invoked for nearly every decision. Dean, of course, was no help. When April asked him at a board meeting who authorized the cameras, he smiled and said, "Security's a community priority. We're just keeping people safe." April leaned forward. "By spying on private property?" Dean didn't answer. Karen cleared her throat and changed the subject to seasonal decor guidelines. That same night, April filed a formal complaint with the County Oversight Board. She included photos, documentation, HOA meeting minutes, and video footage from Scout's collar cam. Yes, we had a camera on our dog because April is always 3 steps ahead. But the story doesn't stop there. Because while April was quietly building her case, Karen was doing what Karens do best, digging her own grave with a clipboard. She started cracking down harder than ever. Fines started flying like coupons at a Black Friday sale. The Bartons were cited for high-gloss stepping stones. The Murphys were told their recycling bin had been placed 1 foot too far from curb alignment. Even the Levinsons got a warning for an unauthorized patio scent. I'm not joking, they had one of those vanilla-scented outdoor candles, and Karen claimed it was an airspace intrusion. It was absurd. And people were finally fed up. One night, we had a spontaneous gathering. Just a few neighbors at first, then more showed up. Lawn chairs unfolded. Flashlights clicked on. It felt like we were back in high school, some secret meeting in the dark. But we weren't planning a prank. We were organizing. April passed around copies of the HOA bylaws with sticky notes and highlights. "Look here," she said, pointing to Section 4.1c. "Any purchase over $500 requires board approval and a majority vote. These cameras? Over $1,200 each." A murmur went through the group. And here, she flipped the page. Section 3.8a, no surveillance equipment may be installed on HOA-maintained property without written community consent. Silence. Then Mrs. Tucker, who'd never spoken more than 5 words to anyone, whispered, "She broke her own rules." April nodded. Exactly. And it didn't stop with the cameras. The HOA financial records, which April had requested under the Public Access Act, showed something even worse. Monthly management stipends labeled as President's Compensation. These payments, $500 each, had been going to Karen for the past 2 years. No vote. No record of approval. No transparency. "She's paying herself," someone said. April shrugged. "She thinks no one's watching." Dean, meanwhile, was still strutting around the neighborhood like he owned it. He'd stopped pretending to be friendly. Now he was full intimidation mode. Dark sunglasses. Flashlight at night. Sometimes he'd just stand at the edge of someone's yard, arms crossed, like he was daring you to say something. He wasn't a cop here. He had no jurisdiction. But people were scared. April wasn't. In fact, the more Dean tried to flex, the more focused she got. One morning, she found him standing by our mailbox taking notes on his phone. "Can I help you?" she asked, stepping onto the porch. He looked up slowly. "Just checking for potential violations." April smiled, calm as ever. "You're trespassing. And you're not authorized to inspect mailboxes." Dean smirked. "Who's going to stop me?" April lifted her phone. "Maybe the county sheriff's office." That was the end of that conversation. But things kept escalating. Karen sent out a community-wide email titled Reclaiming Order, a path forward, where she accused certain residents of creating division, harboring anti-HOA sentiments, and undermining safety initiatives. It was clearly about us. And it was getting personal. 2 days later, we received a notice demanding we remove our American flag. Yes, the flag, because it was creating unnecessary visual contrast with the HOA-approved seasonal palette. April stared at the letter for a full minute. Then she started laughing. "That's it," she said. "We're going full audit." By now, April's folder had turned into a full-blown binder. Inside were 34 documented bylaw violations by Karen, 7 surveillance photos of Dean on private property, 19 neighbor testimonies, 3 county permits that Karen never applied for, a full list of misused funds totaling over $18,000. And then came the surveillance footage. One of our neighbors, a retired drone hobbyist, had a camera pointed toward Karen's backyard for birdwatching. Pure accident. But what he captured one morning was pure gold. Karen hauling boxes labeled HOA files, private, into her shed. According to HOA regulations, all files must be stored in the official HOA office, not on personal property. She wasn't just hoarding documents. She was hiding them. April added it to the binder. And then she mailed it to the state's HOA regulatory board. Certified mail. With tracking. No announcement. No speech. Just quiet action. But even as the net closed in, Karen still didn't get it. That week, she announced a surprise HOA meeting to discuss the spread of nonconformity and the need to install 2 more cameras, this time for safety near communal mailboxes. It was like watching someone try to put out a fire with gasoline. April just smiled and said, "Let her talk. The more she says, the better it is for us." Because the fuse was lit. And the explosion? It was just around the corner. It wasn't the binder that did it. It was the meeting. Karen's surprise HOA gathering was meant to be small, private, just a few concerned citizens, she said. But word got around. Sycamore Springs may be quiet, but gossip moves faster than Amazon Prime. By the time the meeting started, the clubhouse was packed. Folding chairs were pulled from storage. People stood in the back, arms crossed, lips pursed. You could feel it, something was about to break. April sat in the second row. Not in uniform, not holding anything, just watching. Calm. Focused. Karen took the front like a queen at a press conference. Pearls, a pale pink blazer, clipboard balanced like a sword. "I've called this meeting," she began, "because our neighborhood is at risk. We are seeing signs of organized resistance against the standards we all agreed to uphold." She scanned the room slowly, stopping just a second too long on April. Some residents have chosen to spread misinformation, challenge authority, and refuse reasonable guidelines meant to protect our shared peace. We cannot let a few disrupt the many. There were murmurs, uneasy ones. Then she launched into her presentation. Charts. Bullet points. A PowerPoint slide titled Compliance Equals Safety. She talked about the need for more surveillance, tighter controls, mandatory monthly inspections. She called it proactive order management. We called it what it was, suburban tyranny. Then April raised her hand. Karen's smile flickered. "Yes," she said tightly. April stood. Calm voice. No emotion. "Madam President, can you tell us who approved the purchase of the surveillance cameras currently installed on HOA property?" A beat of silence. Karen blinked. "The board. There hasn't been a vote in 6 months." Karen hesitated. "Emergency authority was granted to the president for time-sensitive decisions." April nodded. "And were those cameras permitted by the county?" Karen cleared her throat. "They are temporary safety measures." April pulled out a printed county notice and handed it to the front row. According to county code, any surveillance equipment on shared property must have a permit. These do not. Someone in the back whispered, "Seriously?" Then April reached into her bag and pulled out the binder. She didn't raise her voice. Didn't pace. She simply walked to the podium and placed the binder beside Karen's clipboard. This contains documentation of bylaw violations, unauthorized spending, surveillance without consent, and misuse of community funds. It's been submitted to the State Regulatory Board. And to the press. Gasp. One man actually dropped his coffee. Karen turned pale. You're lying, she said finally, voice trembling. April didn't flinch. Page 17, line 4. You approved a personal monthly stipend. $500 for 2 years. No board approval. No record. Karen's mouth opened but no sound came out. Then someone else stood up. Mrs. Levinson, the same woman who once got fined for her 2 cheerful sunflowers. I have proof, she said. Photos of Dean walking into my yard. No warrant. No notice. The Crawfords joined in. Karen voted 3 times in the last meeting, using proxies from residents who moved out last year. The floodgates opened. Every row. Every aisle. People spoke. Some angry. Some shaking. But all fed up. Karen tried to talk over them. You people don't understand the burden of leadership. April cut in. We understand abuse of power. Then she dropped the final bombshell. A copy of the HOA's recent bank statement shows a purchase made to a local surveillance supplier. Same supplier Dean's brother works for. Conflict of interest. Also, Dean isn't even registered for code enforcement. Dead silence. Karen stumbled back. You set me up. This is harassment. This is a coup. But it wasn't. It was a reckoning. April didn't say another word. She simply walked back to her chair. The room was already boiling over. Someone shouted, vote to remove her. Another, open the books. Then the HOA vice chair, silent for months, stood up and cleared his throat. Effective immediately, he said, Karen Mallory is suspended pending investigation. A third-party audit is being initiated. All HOA operations are frozen. Karen gasped. You can't do this. But they could. And they did. She stormed out, nearly tripping over her own clipboard. Dean wasn't far behind, his jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might snap. But this wasn't the end. Because the next morning, things escalated to a place no one expected. A police car pulled onto our street. Not Dean. Actual officers. And that's when it happened. Dean returned. Not in uniform. No badge. Just rage. And a gun. Right there in front of our house. Everything April had prepared for, the documentation, the reports, the video surveillance, was about to be tested in a way we never wanted. Because next, the front lawn incident. And this time there would be no warnings. It happened so fast I barely had time to yell. Dean came marching across our lawn like a man looking for a fight. No badge. No uniform. Just a storm in his eyes and a gun on his hip. April was watering the flower bed. She looked up calm as ever. Take the flag down, he barked. We'd had that flag up for 8 years. Suddenly, it was a community hazard. April didn't move. Dean stepped closer. Now. Karen stood at the sidewalk behind him, arms crossed, smirking like the devil in yoga pants. April said one word, no. That's when Dean reached for his gun. Before he could aim, April spoke again. You're violating a protective order. This is being recorded. And it was. 3 angles. Doorbell cam, Scout's collar cam, and Mrs. Tucker's iPhone from across the street. Dean hesitated. Too late. 2 county deputies appeared from the corner, real ones. They'd been waiting. April had filed a restraining order 3 days prior, and the footage was already in the sheriff's hands. Drop the weapon, one of them said. Dean froze, then did the dumbest thing he could. He raised it. 1/2 inch, no more. That's all it took. He was tackled to the ground in seconds. Karen screamed, tried to run. A deputy stopped her. She wasn't under arrest, yet, but the questions started coming fast. And then came the clipboard. It fell from her hand. April picked it up, flipped to the top page and smiled. A handwritten note from Karen, approving a personal bonus, president's discretion. Triple the legal limit. The final nail. Within 24 hours, Dean was booked for assault and violation of a court order. Karen was removed officially, pending criminal charges for fraud, misuse of funds and illegal surveillance. Within 24 hours, Dean was booked for assault and violation of a court order. Karen was officially removed and now faces criminal charges for fraud and illegal surveillance. Peace returned. Cameras came down. And the wind chime? Still hanging. Still singing. If this story made your day a little better, we'd be honored if you gave it a like and subscribed. More true HOA chaos drops every day.